You know, the reason billions of people have been lifted out of poverty around the world, you've got to think about this, right? In 1947, when the partition of India happened, the average life expectancy in India was 32. 32, right? Today, it's over 70, and the reason is because of capitalism, and capitalism was created right here in England. You should look it up, sir. You should look it up.
Everything he's saying is facts. Everything he's saying is true.
It's a lot to render me speechless, as you've already observed, but I'm still speechless from that incredible graph you showed earlier where China was the most trusted media place in the world. I mean, this is hilarious, right? It's like if you went back to the Soviet Union, you would have got 100% trust in media because the entire narrative is completely controlled. China is a country in which you can't even Google Tiananmen Square, and a whole bunch of Western apps are unavailable. The idea that we would put them on the same chart as Western countries is preposterous in and of itself. Now, as for Russia, Ukraine, as I said earlier, I from the outset have said that I think the West, or certainly the UK, which I'm a citizen of, needs to do everything it can to support the Ukrainians and their.
So this debate is Keeson going against an entire audience of people when it comes to Western free speech and when it comes to Western freedom, such as the freedom of speech. And it's funny to me how people are going to disagree with him in this entire video, but I think he's going to make some pretty good points. I'm not sure, but I'm going to follow it as objectively as I possibly can. Please make sure you like and subscribe, and let's get into it.
Fight for their independence. However, we had a recent example with Nigel Farage, for example. I've had Nigel on my show. There's even a clip on our channel of me arguing with him about this issue. I think it's called Nigel Farage versus Russian or something like that. And he recently made comments, or rather he was asked to make comments about the whole conflict. And when he shared his view, which he's had for probably 2 decades, about NATO expansion, European Union expansion, etc., he was immediately demonized as some kind of evil pro-Putin monster, which I just thought was completely irresponsible. We have to be able to have a sensible debate about the issues. And this is why I completely agree with Steve. I wouldn't say it's a particularly Western phenomenon. I think in the West we've done more than anyone to try and overcome these moral panics, actually. But nonetheless, human psychology, mass psychosis is what it is. We do get into problems where everyone thinks the same thing. No one's allowed to disagree. No one's allowed to voice a concern.
Well, it gets back to the quote of he or she who controls the present controls the past. And it's a very, very important point, particularly on NATO expansion. There were a great number of people who were worried about what the consequences of NATO expansion would bring, and that people were looking at this as sort of a cheap way to have a rah-rah relationship in Europe, and that would be low cost. Well, our current director of the CIA in the United States, Bill Burns, a friend of mine, was our ambassador to Russia, wrote a memo in 2008 and said the expansion of NATO into Ukraine would be a neuralgic issue for the Russians. Now, Bill Burns is faithfully representing Joe Biden and the White House and all of this, but he wrote that memo. He's probably the most knowledgeable person in the U.S. government on Russia, and he was worried about this. Does that mean that you don't expand NATO? Maybe you do, but you have to be cognizant of what the costs and consequences would be from the top analysts, and that when you squelch that, you just cancel that debate. And it wasn't just Nigel Farage who was raising this. A whole squad of American foreign policy intellectuals were worried about the various dimensions of this and basically got squeezed out of the story.
Right. That was a debate we should have been able to have. And the most important thing that worries me about the way we have conversations generally is people automatically assume that you're a bad person because you have a position that they don't agree with, right? We should be able to have the sorts of robust discussions we've been having today without coming away from that thinking, well, this person disagrees with me about Israel and Palestine or Russia, Ukraine, therefore they're a bad person. What if they just have a different perspective that you don't particularly like? That's the whole point of having the ability to have these conversations.
And I like the fact that he just said that, because I've seen this problem arise all throughout politics. And this is actually the premise that my channel is built on. Just because someone disagrees with you doesn't mean that they're an evil, satanic person. Like, that does not mean that. Some people just disagree with you. And that goes for the right or the left. But we've got it to such a point where if you have different opinions, then you're just completely demonized from the other side. I'll honestly say, though, it's gotten much better now than it used to be. I think I don't even want to say that because I don't be on social media as much as I used to. But I think it got better, but I'm not even sure. And he's kind of pointing that out. Like, he's getting demonized by groups of people, possibly, because he has different takes.
Okay, can I bring in our on-stage audience? Abdurrahman first.
Thank you so much. It's a great chance to ask this question. So, being lived in 5 countries and traveling to more than 10 countries in my lifetime, I've noticed that. So we say that the West might have developed very fast because of its values that are great. But I have a small question here to see. Most of the countries I visited, which were meant to be full of resources, somehow had bad management. And some of the countries that they seem to be known for having little resources, had better management in them. So things like the internet and cars actually came because of wars. What are the chances that the West advanced because of some lacks in resources and because of the colonization that happened, and because and in some of the global South countries they still think the third world and the first world is actually a ranking instead of whether you are following the West or the SU back when the Second World War was happening. So what are the chances that the reason why free speech is not being applied well in other governments is because the way the government is being run is not in line with the values of that country's people itself?
May I make just a very quick
please,
point to just on your point? I'm not going to be able to cover all of your question, but I just wanted to pick on something you said. We hear this conversation about colonialism a lot now, especially in the West. The sad truth of the world is that every great empire and every great civilization was created through conquest. If you look at Russia on the map, it's the biggest country in the world. That didn't happen by holding hands and singing Kumbaya. I studied Islamic history when I was at university. The great successes of the caliphate in its early days were not achieved through holding hands and singing Kumbaya. Every great civilization advances through conquest. When people talk about colonialism and complain, all I hear is losers complaining about losing.
So that was not a complaint. I see that something happened again.
I don't mean you specifically.
Nah, he low-key just snapped with that, bro. He low-key just snapped. That's a fact. That's a fact. Everyone likes to virtue signal when it comes to their group of people, when it comes to their party or their family or their beliefs. But in reality, even when it comes to different homelands and different economic stances and even America itself, a lot of things came through conquest. And even America in the Western world was better when it came to conquest. We were one of the first places to end slavery, to end a caste system. America, people still don't understand that. We are the free world. We don't just get that nickname for nothing. We're the free world. And he finally just said it, and they act so shocked. They're like, I can't believe you just said that. It's the truth. I don't know. I don't understand.
I mean, just this whole narrative about colonialism.
The point is, the only word you heard from my friend was slavery, and the only word you heard from me was colonialism. My question was, and it's
well, as I said, your question is long and complicated.
I'll simplify it. It's okay.
So if your point was, we create a lot of the things that we created through war, and many of our achievements were developed through that. My point to you is, all of human achievements were created through that to some extent.
Absolutely. My question was, we are saying, we're all talking about Western narrative, not because we're trying to pick the best place and then we all can go live in. I think we're trying to find the way to advance the narrative in the world to the better for everybody as much as we can, if that's possible.
I think it is, so.
Okay. So my question was, the value, you first say that everybody's following their interests, but then you say, I think the West values are the best. So is it morals and values, or is it interest? I want to know. And is it because the other countries like Jordan, where they try to follow the Western narrative, and as much as prices are the same as in UK, but salaries are not even third, is that because the values of the people are different from the values of the system that they are following?
No, I don't think it's because of that. Obviously, different countries have different resources and different histories and different geographical positions and different neighbors, etc. When I say every country and every civilization pursues its own interests, that's just a statement of fact. But in terms of values, the reason I say Western values are better is the West is the only place that the idea of government by consent, the idea of freedom of the individual, the idea of free market capitalism, and the idea that we should all be free to pursue our own interests as we see them fit is even considered a value. That, to me, is the reason for our success. Now, of course, the United States is not only successful because of their ideas, it's successful because it has a geographical monopoly on a continent. It's able to be completely free from invasion. It's a newly created country that was able to build infrastructure from scratch. And on and on and on and on we can go, right? But ultimately, what I'm saying is the values, the reason billions of people have been lifted out of poverty around the world, you've got to think about this, right? In 1947, when the partition of India happened, the average life expectancy in India was 32. 32, right? Today, it's over 70, and the reason is because of capitalism, and capitalism was created right here in England. You should look it up, sir. You should look it up.
So, Abdurrahman, we're going to just,
And here's the thing. Everything he's saying is facts. Everything he's saying is true. It's true. And here's the funny part. When I sit down and I do my videos, I try to be fair. I try to be as fair as possible. If someone says something I agree with, I'm going to say it. Like, yeah, you're telling the truth. You're right. If they don't, I'm going to call it out in a respectful way. But the fact that nobody on stage is agreeing with him, they're not even acknowledging anything positive that he's saying. They're just pretending like his thoughts mean nothing and trying to find new ways to refute his claims or just change the subject entirely. And he just said, I'm tired of this. We're doing the right thing. Y'all can say whatever you want. Y'all are being biased. He's tired of it, bro, and I don't blame him.
had such a robust conversation so far, I think it's fair to say, but we now have to move on to the part of the show that we call the Mejlis. Probably a very important, crucial moment to bring this in now, a space for understanding multiple perspectives. So let's take a moment, let's just breathe and reflect on the discussion so far. Did someone here say something that you hadn't considered before? Perhaps your perspective shifted. Perhaps it's become even more pronounced. Let's go to anyone from our speakers and our on-stage audience this is for. So let's go first to Tamim.
So I actually do agree with Constantine about the chart, right? If we look at the countries like China, obviously there's a problem, and I agree there's a problem because people are sheltered in the amount of resources and media they consume. Now, in the West, it's true, right? There is some sort of multiple understanding of what's happening in the world. And that's why people are saying what they're saying. And I also agree with you with another thing is when you said the West acts with its own interest. And that's why the United States is able to aid and abet a genocide in Gaza with impunity. The fact that this genocide has been able to continue to this day is for that reason, right? Let's be honest, some nations are powerful in what they do, and that's the reason it succeeds. And this is where I have to maybe disagree a little bit with Steve, since I initially thought about algorithms. For somehow, when people say, we need to worry about algorithm and think about A, B, and C, it's besides the point, because it's like we're claiming that YouTube and all those meta channels do not have an algorithm for themselves. And I also disagree with another thing. There were so many encampments for Iraq, for Vietnam, for South African apartheid, like the one in Columbia University, where students had to chain themselves to tell them like, hey, apartheid's bad, maybe it's time to divest. Same what's happening now. The issue for the West right now is people have access to that media much faster. And that's why people are speaking up in a much way that seems like it's a problem to the people in power.
I think what's really interesting about this discussion is that it splinters in so many wonderful ways. Like, the West is wonderful because it has this great personal liberty, but everyone is terrified about like woke. What is woke? I mean, what does it mean that you get fined for misgendering people? Like, who do you know who has been fined for misgendering people? Like, no one gets fined for misgendering people.
I know lots of people, but we're in the agreements phase of the conversation.
But that's.
And I like the fact, and this is what I was talking about. Initially, first of all, they changed the subject entirely. Remember, he was having a whole debate with people. He won the debate. Nobody responded to him. And rather than acknowledging the fact that what he said was accurate, they completely changed the subject. They said, let's move on from this segment and move into a segment where we're going to allow everyone to say what they hated about his statements. And that's what's happening. They're outwardly just saying everything that they hated about his statements. This woman says she doesn't know what woke is. She doesn't understand that statement. Come on, man. That's not even a realistic stand. That's not even a realistic thing to say. Anyways, bro, do you guys get what I'm saying? This is the type of bias that happens in a lot of these debates. But nonetheless, I'm gonna end this here. Let me know what you guys think. My name is LFR Jojo, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.